Jim Joe.
Run, Vicky, run!
What if I told you that one of Mark Twain's most famous stories was turned into a television series almost 60 years ago, not as a book adaptation, but as a bold primetime experiment? It ran on NBC, lasted one season, and then vanished. This is the rise and fall of the New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and why it ended so suddenly. The Big Swing, why it existed.
Don't move!
What do you want?
Money, gold, jewels!
Let's get one thing straight. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn didn't come from caution. By 1968, Hanna-Barbera was already a TV powerhouse. They had Saturday morning classics. They knew animation. They knew kids. But they also knew they were boxed into a corner. Animation was still treated like cheap filler, something to keep kids busy, not something worth prime time. So they took a gamble. They redesigned Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and Becky Thatcher, familiar names, and put them in an animated world that felt dangerous, unpredictable, and visually unlike anything else on TV. Every episode was built on a simple but risky idea: live action plus full animation. That would equal a weekly broadcast that could feel like a mini-movie every week. That meant production was complicated, not cheap, not fast. But NBC looked at it and said, "We're giving this a primetime slot." They didn't hide it away in a cartoon block. They put it at 7 p.m. Sunday, a family viewing hour. That's not where you experiment with kids' shows. That's where you put something you think can stick. And in a weird way, it did, at least at first. It was successful before things fell apart. Because despite what people assume today, this show didn't crash and burn right out of the gate. It actually worked, at least at first. The series ran for 20 full episodes, airing from September 15, 1968 to February 23, 1969, and every single one of those episodes aired in prime time on NBC. That alone tells you this wasn't some throwaway project. Networks didn't give you 20 weeks unless you were doing something right. Critics noticed the ambition. They talked about how unusual the mix of live action and animation was. They liked the kids. They liked the effort. This wasn't shovelware. This was a real swing. And audiences noticed too. The show didn't just air in the US. It was picked up in more than 15 countries while it was still new. The young cast was doing public appearances. There was even a comic book adaptation released in 1968, the same year the show premiered. Now, that might not sound wild today, but you have to remember the era. This was before home video, before cable TV, before the internet. If a show traveled internationally and got spin-off material back then, that meant it had real value. It meant people were paying attention. What's wild is that, back then, people actually noticed something unusual. Because the show aired at night, it pulled in more than just kids. Families were watching together, which gave it a bigger reach than your typical Saturday morning cartoon. And that's the part you really need to understand. This did not start as a nobody show. It wasn't some forgotten failure from day one. It started as something people noticed, something the network believed in, something that, for a brief moment, felt like it had a future. And that's exactly why what happens next is so confusing, and honestly, fascinating. If you're enjoying this nugget of nostalgia, smash like and subscribe for more retro deep dives. The peak that wasn't enough.
It don't do any good, Your Majesty.
Have you looked in the briar patch?
I'd have to be 6 kinds of an idiot to ever put it there.
Well, that's the first place you should have looked.
Now here's where the story starts to get misleading. Because if you zoom out and just look at the New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn on paper, it feels like the show had stabilized. By the middle of its run, the format worked. The rhythm was there. Kids who tuned in knew exactly what they were getting every single week. 3 kids, strange animated worlds, a new level of danger, and a villain who never let up. Creatively, the show wasn't collapsing. It wasn't spinning its wheels. It had found its lane. And that's important because a lot of canceled shows fall apart before the plug is pulled. This one didn't. If anything, it was getting more confident in what it was trying to be. But here's the problem. Finding your lane is not the same thing as breaking through. Primetime television doesn't reward shows for being interesting. It rewards them for becoming routine. Sunday night viewing is built on habit. Families sit down at the same time every week and default to what already feels familiar. They don't experiment endlessly. They don't chase novelty. They pick a show and stay there. And Huckleberry Finn never quite crossed that line. People who watched it remembered it. People who didn't weren't being dragged in by anything too attractive or amazing. So the show landed in a dangerous middle ground. It wasn't failing loudly, it just wasn't winning hard enough. And when a show is expensive, ambitious, and sitting in prime time, that middle ground is where things start to go wrong. The time slot trap.
She's getting ready to run.
Because the real issue wasn't just the ratings. It was where those ratings were being measured. Sunday night at 7 p.m. sounds prestigious. And in theory, it is. That's a slot networks reserve for shows they believe in. But it's also one of the toughest hours on television. That hour belongs to comfort. It belongs to shows families already trust. Shows that don't ask viewers to adjust. Shows that feel safe after a long weekend. And The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn wasn't safe television. It was strange. It was dark for a kid's show. It asked viewers to lean in. And here's the brutal reality. Kids didn't control what stayed on the TV. Parents did. So, while kids might have been intrigued by the danger and the animated worlds, parents were the ones deciding whether to keep tuning in every Sunday. And most families don't gamble their primetime routine on something unfamiliar week after week. That meant the show wasn't just competing with other programs. It was competing with habit itself. And habit almost always wins. This is where the fate of the show was quietly sealed. Not because it was bad, not because it scared people off, but because it was put in a place where only dominant shows survive. And almost just doesn't cut it there. When the money starts to matter.
Roaring lions. But without twitching an eyelash, I walked right up to the shillelagh and...
Hello.
And this is where the story stops being about taste, or tone, or even ratings, and starts being about cost. Because every single episode of The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was expensive by design. Now we can't find out how expensive each episode was. But creators of the show, Hanna-Barbera, once mentioned during the development that it was possibly the most expensive half-hour of television production at that time. This wasn't a normal cartoon where you could crank out episodes quickly and cheaply. Every week required live-action production with child actors, followed by full animation, and then careful editing to stitch the two together so it actually worked on screen. That meant longer schedules. More people are involved, more money spent per episode. And here's the part that really matters. Cheap shows can afford patience. Expensive shows can't. If a low-cost cartoon doesn't explode right away, a network can let it sit, grow slowly, maybe find its audience. But when a show costs real money and sits in prime time, it doesn't get that luxury. NBC wasn't just asking, is this show good? They were asking, is this show worth what we're paying for it? And the answer, week after week, wasn't a clear yes. The ratings weren't collapsing, they just weren't climbing fast enough. So now the show had three things working against it at the same time. A tough time slot, a slow-growing audience, and a budget that demanded results. That's the danger zone. Because at that point, even a decent performance starts to look like a liability. Comment below. Did you watch The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? And should Twain's book get a modern animated retelling for today's kids? The disconnect from the novel.
They'd be afraid not to.
Will you take us to them?
No, you will take us there.
Mr. Biddle, my hand, sir. Which way?
That way.
One thing that tripped this show up almost from the start was the fact that it barely felt like Twain's story anymore. Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is one of the most important classics in American literature. A river journey that is equal parts satire, social commentary, and the deeply personal voice of a boy wrestling with what's right and wrong while floating down the Mississippi. It's serious, it's messy, it's funny, and it doesn't shy away from hard truths about the world. The TV show, by contrast, took those names, Huck, Tom, Becky, and dropped them into a carousel of random animated worlds, chased by a villain and hopping from jungle to desert to pirate ship. Critics of the time even said the characters were freshly scrubbed and didn't feel like the complicated boys Twain wrote about. Instead of moral tension or social satire, the series was mostly about action, spectacle, and short-term thrills built around a live-action/animation gimmick. That made it fun for kids in short bursts, but it also meant adult viewers and fans of the book didn't see the heart of the original story. The friendships, the moral growth, the river as a living, breathing world. And when you market a show with one of America's most revered titles but deliver something that barely resembles the themes that made the book unforgettable, it's not surprising that it struggled to build a deep audience connection. The show that didn't really die.
He said that once you got inside a place,
place like this and the gate's closed, you can never get out again.
That's right. Just like us, now we can't get out.
And you did this for me?
Even though The New Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was canceled after one season, it didn't actually disappear. Because back then, cancellation didn't always mean extinction. The episodes didn't get buried. They got repackaged. Hanna-Barbera folded the show into syndicated blocks alongside other properties, where it played to kids who never saw it during its original primetime run. No pressure, no Sunday night competition. Just episodes showing up in afternoon slots where kids actually controlled the TV. And suddenly, the show made more sense. Without the weight of prime time, people remembered it differently. It felt eerie. It felt imaginative. It felt ahead of its time. That's why so many people swear they remember it being bigger than it actually was. Because culturally, it lived longer than its ratings ever suggested. This is one of those shows that gained its reputation after it was already dead. No Nielsen pressure, no budget expectations, just memory. And that's why it still gets talked about today, while dozens of higher-rated shows from the same era are completely forgotten. Would a modern adaptation work today?
Is the prosecutor ready?
Ready, Your Honor?
Is the defense ready?
Ready for the defense, such as it is.
Would a faithful adaptation of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn actually work today? Honestly, probably not. At least, not in the way people imagine. The novel is messy by design. It's built around uncomfortable language, moral confusion, and a white kid slowly realizing that the rules he's been taught are wrong. That's the point of the book. Twain wasn't trying to make something clean or uplifting. He was trying to make readers sit with discomfort. That's exactly why schools still argue about it, and why parents still hesitate, and why adaptations keep softening it. A truly accurate version, one that keeps the language, the racial tension, the satire, the moral ambiguity, wouldn't be a kid's show. And it probably wouldn't be a family show either. It would land somewhere awkward, too heavy for children, too controversial for mainstream comfort, and too slow and reflective for audiences trained on fast-moving adventure. That's why most adaptations don't really adapt the book. They borrow the names, they borrow the idea of adventure, and they quietly walk away from the parts that made the novel important. So the problem isn't just format or platform. It's that Huckleberry Finn is a difficult story, and difficulty doesn't travel well in commercial entertainment, especially these days when it seems the majority of viewers have become increasingly and sometimes illogically sensitive. The 1968 show avoided that difficulty completely, and in doing so, it became easier to sell, but also easier to forget. That's the real tension. A faithful adaptation might be artistically powerful, but commercially, it would be fighting the same battle Twain started almost 150 years ago, asking people to stay uncomfortable longer than they want to. And history suggests that's never an easy sell.